High-value women don't waste energy fighting toxic people. They don't try to win arguments, prove their worth, or change someone who has already shown you who they are. They understand something most people learn too late. Toxic people are not problems to be solved. They are situations to be managed. A high-value woman moves differently because she sees clearly. She observes patterns, not promises. She listens to actions, not words, and when someone shows manipulation, disrespect, or emotional instability, she doesn't get emotional. She gets strategic. Toxic people thrive on reaction. They feed on chaos, guilt, and emotional leakage. They want access to your energy, your time, your attention. A high-value woman understands this and removes the fuel. She becomes calm where others get loud, detached where others get reactive, silent where others over-explain. That silence isn't weakness, it's control. She doesn't argue with people who are committed to misunderstanding her. She doesn't chase clarity with someone who benefits from confusion. She knows that explaining yourself to someone who has already decided to disrespect you only teaches them how to manipulate you better. High-value women don't announce boundaries, they enforce them quietly. Consistently, without drama, when a toxic person pushes, she doesn't push back emotionally. She steps back mentally. She creates distance. Distance is power. Distance removes leverage, and leverage is what toxic people rely on. She understands emotional discipline. She knows that just because someone provokes her doesn't mean she has to respond. Just because someone is loud doesn't mean they are right. Just because someone is offended doesn't mean she did something wrong. Toxic people often test limits early. They disrespect small things to see what they can get away with. A high-value woman notices the first red flag, not the fifth. She doesn't ignore discomfort. She trusts it. Because intuition is intelligence gathered quietly. She does not personalize bad behavior. She doesn't internalize insults from people who lack self-control, self-awareness, or integrity. She understands that how someone treats you is a reflection of their inner world, not your value. And here's something important. High-value women are not cruel. They are fair. They don't seek revenge. They seek peace. They don't need to punish toxic people because consequences handle that naturally when access is removed. She doesn't beg for respect. She expects it. And if it's not given, she leaves, not angrily, not loudly, cleanly. She also understands that some people only behave well when they fear losing you. So she makes herself comfortable with walking away. She doesn't threaten it. She lives it. And toxic people sense that immediately. A high-value woman is emotionally self-contained. She doesn't outsource her self-worth. She doesn't need validation from unstable people. She knows who she is, and that makes manipulation ineffective. When faced with gaslighting, she doesn't argue facts endlessly. She states the truth once and watches behavior. If the behavior doesn't change, she changes the level of access. No speeches, no ultimatums, just adjustment. She also knows when silence is the most powerful response. Silence forces accountability. Silence removes the game. Silence makes toxic people uncomfortable because they can't control it. High-value women don't chase closure from people who lack honesty. They give themselves closure through acceptance. Acceptance that some people will never apologize. Acceptance that not everyone is meant to stay. Acceptance that peace is more valuable than being right. They don't tolerate repeated disrespect disguised as jokes. They don't excuse emotional immaturity. They don't stay in environments where they have to constantly defend their boundaries. And most importantly, they don't try to save toxic people. They understand that you can't heal someone who enjoys being harmful. Compassion without boundaries is self-destruction. A high-value woman invests her energy where it grows, not where it drains. She chooses calm over chaos, stability over intensity, respect over attention. She knows that walking away isn't losing. Staying where you are diminished is. So when toxic people realize they can't control her emotions, can't provoke reactions, can't access her energy. That's when the dynamic shifts, because the strongest position you can ever be in is being willing to leave what no longer serves you. That is how high-value women handle toxic people, not with noise, not with anger, but with clarity, composure, and absolute self-respect. High-value women don't confront toxicity emotionally because emotion is exactly what toxic people are trying to extract. They understand that the moment you react impulsively, explain excessively, or defend yourself emotionally, you have already given away leverage. Toxic individuals are skilled at pulling people into confusion, drama, and power struggles, and a high-value woman refuses to play games she didn't sign up for. Instead of reacting, she observes. Instead of arguing, she analyzes. Instead of engaging emotionally, she engages strategically. She knows that toxic behavior is rarely accidental. It follows patterns. There is provocation followed by denial, disrespect disguised as humor, manipulation framed as concern, and chaos hidden behind charm. A high-value woman pays attention to these patterns early. She doesn't wait for proof to pile up until the damage is irreversible. She doesn't need 10 incidents to justify one clear feeling of discomfort. She understands that intuition is data collected faster than logic can explain. Strategic handling begins with control over reactions. She does not allow someone else to dictate her emotional state. Anger, defensiveness, guilt, and urgency are emotions toxic people rely on to gain power. When those emotions don't show up, the toxic person loses footing. Calm becomes armor. Neutral responses become barriers. Short answers become signals that access is shrinking. She also understands that explaining yourself to a toxic person is rarely about clarity. It's about control. The more you explain, the more material they have to twist, dismiss, or weaponize later. So she speaks clearly, briefly, and only when necessary. She doesn't overcommunicate. She doesn't repeat herself endlessly. She states her position once and watches behavior instead of promises. High-value women manage toxicity by controlling access, access to time, access to attention, access to emotional intimacy. Not everyone deserves full access, and she knows that proximity is a privilege, not a right. When someone shows disrespect, inconsistency, or manipulation, she doesn't debate whether it was intentional. She adjusts access accordingly, less availability, less engagement, less personal information. This quiet reduction speaks louder than confrontation ever could. Distance is one of the most powerful tools she uses. Distance creates clarity. Distance removes emotional fog. Distance weakens manipulation. Toxic people often rely on constant contact to maintain influence, whether through messaging, arguments, or emotional pull. When that contact decreases, their control weakens. A high-value woman is comfortable creating that distance without guilt because she understands that self-protection is not cruelty. She also manages toxicity by refusing to personalize bad behavior. She does not internalize insults from someone who lacks self-awareness. She does not measure her worth based on someone else's dysfunction. When criticism comes from a place of instability, she recognizes it as noise, not truth. This internal boundary protects her self-image from being eroded by external chaos. Strategic handling also means choosing when not to respond at all. Silence is not avoidance for a high-value woman. It is discernment. She knows that some people don't want resolution. They want reaction. Silence removes the reward. Silence disrupts the cycle. Silence forces the other person to sit with their own behavior. She doesn't rush to fill uncomfortable gaps or resolve tension that wasn't created by her. Control over reactions also means emotional regulation under pressure. Toxic people often escalate when they sense they're losing influence. They provoke harder, accuse louder, or play the victim. A high-value woman recognizes escalation as a sign that the strategy is working. She does not match intensity. She maintains composure. Emotional discipline keeps her grounded while the other person reveals themselves. She also knows the difference between confrontation and correction. Confrontation seeks to change the other person. Correction protects the self. A high-value woman is focused on correction. She changes how she shows up, how much she gives, how much she tolerates. She understands that you cannot control others, but you can control exposure. Managing toxicity strategically requires self-trust. She trusts her perceptions even when someone tries to gaslight them. She doesn't argue reality endlessly. She knows that someone committed to denying truth will never accept facts. Instead of exhausting herself, she steps back and lets actions confirm what words deny. High-value women also recognize that boundaries are ineffective without consequences. Strategy means follow through. If someone crosses a line repeatedly, she does not reset the boundary with more emotion. She reduces access further. She becomes unavailable. She disengages. Consistency teaches people how to treat you more effectively than confrontation ever could. She is also aware that toxic dynamics often thrive on hope. Hope that the person will change. Hope that this time will be different. A high-value woman does not base decisions on potential. She bases them on reality. She understands that patterns are predictors, and when a pattern shows disrespect, manipulation, or instability, she responds accordingly. Managing toxicity strategically also means protecting energy. She does not allow toxic people to dominate her mental space long after interactions end. She does not replay conversations endlessly. She does not rehearse arguments in her head. She processes, learns, and releases. Energy is finite, and she invests it where it grows, not where it drains. She understands that walking away emotionally often happens before walking away physically. Detachment begins internally. Expectations lower. Emotional investment reduces, dependence dissolves. By the time she creates physical distance, she is already free mentally. A high-value woman doesn't need to prove strength by staying in toxic environments. Her strength is shown in her ability to leave without chaos, without revenge, without explanation overload. Strategy over emotion allows her to exit with dignity intact and power preserved. She knows that toxic people often label boundaries as cruelty, distance as coldness, and silence as arrogance. She is not moved by these labels. She understands they are attempts to regain control. She stays anchored in her values, not in other people's projections. By managing toxicity instead of confronting it emotionally, she remains unshakable. She stays clear-headed. She keeps her standards intact. She understands that the goal is not to win against toxic people, but to remove their ability to disrupt her peace, her focus, and her sense of self. And she does this not through force or noise, but through controlled reactions, intentional distance, and the quiet confidence of someone who knows exactly what she will and will not tolerate. High-value women do not make long speeches about boundaries because boundaries are not performances, they are standards. Announcing boundaries repeatedly invites debate, negotiation, and manipulation, and a high-value woman has no interest in convincing anyone to respect her. She understands that people who genuinely respect you do not need constant reminders, and people who don't will only use those reminders to test how serious you really are. She enforces boundaries quietly because quiet enforcement removes drama. There is no emotional charge for toxic people to feed on. There is no argument to win. There is no reaction to twist. Boundaries are communicated once, clearly, and then reinforced through action. If behavior changes, access remains. If it doesn't, access is reduced. This consistency teaches people exactly where they stand without her having to explain herself again and again. A high-value woman also understands that boundaries without consequences are merely requests. She does not rely on hope that someone will suddenly develop respect. She watches what happens after a boundary is set. If it is crossed, she responds immediately, not emotionally, but decisively. She does not escalate with anger. She escalates with distance. She does not feel guilty for enforcing boundaries because she knows guilt is a tool often used by toxic people to regain control. When someone accuses her of being cold, selfish, or dramatic for protecting herself, she recognizes that accusation as resistance. Resistance only appears when a boundary threatens someone's access or advantage. Instead of softening, she holds steady. Quiet enforcement also means she does not over-explain her decisions. Over-explaining signals uncertainty and invites argument. A high-value woman trusts her judgment enough to let her actions speak. She does not need approval to protect her peace. She does not need validation to step back from disrespect. The less she explains, the less room there is for manipulation. She understands that consistency is what gives boundaries their power. One exception teaches someone to keep pushing. One apology without change teaches them that words are enough. So she watches patterns, not promises. If behavior repeats, consequences repeat. This calm predictability removes confusion and reinforces respect. High-value women also understand that boundaries are personal, not punishments. They are not designed to control others, but to define what behavior is allowed in their presence. When someone violates a boundary, she does not try to correct their character. She adjusts her involvement. She does not attempt to manage their emotions. She manages her environment. Enforcing boundaries quietly also requires emotional self-control. It means staying calm when someone reacts badly. Toxic people often escalate when boundaries are enforced. They may gill, trip, play the victim, accuse, or provoke. A high-value woman does not absorb this. She allows people to feel however they feel without taking responsibility for it. She also understands that boundaries often reveal who people really are. Someone who respects you will adjust. Someone who benefits from disrespect will resist. This information is valuable. She does not chase people who fail this test. She lets the boundary do the filtering for her. High-value women do not negotiate their self-respect. They do not bargain for basic decency. They do not stay in conversations where they are being talked down to, dismissed, or manipulated. When a line is crossed, she disengages, not to punish, but to protect. Quiet enforcement also means she does not threaten consequences. She simply applies them. Threats invite challenges. Action ends debates. When access is removed without warning speeches, toxic people are often shocked because they expected more chances, more explanations, more emotional labor. A high-value woman does not provide unlimited opportunities to disrespect her. She understands that boundaries are cumulative. Small violations matter because they reveal entitlement. Ignoring small violations trains people to push further. So she addresses issues early, calmly, and clearly. One firm response early prevents years of resentment later. She also accepts that enforcing boundaries may cost her certain relationships. She is prepared for that. She understands that peace sometimes requires letting go. She does not cling to connections that require constant betrayal. She values stability over familiarity. High-value women do not confuse kindness with tolerance. They can be compassionate and firm at the same time. They do not excuse harmful behavior because of someone's past, stress, or intentions. Understanding does not mean acceptance. Empathy does not mean access. Quiet boundary enforcement also protects her energy. She does not waste time arguing about what should be obvious. She does not engage in circular conversations designed to wear her down. She knows when a conversation is no longer productive and chooses silence over exhaustion. She does not seek revenge or control. She seeks alignment. When alignment is missing, she steps back. She understands that people who respect you do not need to be managed, and people who don't cannot be convinced. High-value women also recognize that boundaries must be enforced with themselves. She does not keep returning to environments that drain her. She does not override her own limits out of loneliness, guilt, or fear of being misunderstood. Self-respect begins internally. When she enforces boundaries quietly, she remains composed, her dignity stays intact, her energy remains protected. She does not need to announce strength because her behavior demonstrates it. Over time, people either adjust or disappear, and she is at peace with both outcomes. She knows that the goal of boundaries is not isolation but quality. Fewer relationships, higher standards, less noise, more clarity. By enforcing boundaries consistently and without drama, she creates a life where respect is normal, not negotiated, and where her presence is valued because it is not freely given to those who repeatedly show they do not deserve it. Emotional discipline is the foundation of a high-value woman's power because it keeps her unreactive in situations designed to provoke her. Toxic people rely on emotional chaos to create leverage. They provoke, insult, guilt, and confuse because they need a reaction to feel in control. A high-value woman understands this dynamic deeply and refuses to hand over control of her emotional state to anyone else. She does not confuse feelings with facts. Just because something feels intense does not mean it deserves an immediate response. She pauses, she breathes, she creates space between stimulus and reaction. In that space, power lives. While others lash out or over-explain, she remains composed. Composure unsettles toxic people because it denies them the validation they seek. Calm is not passivity for her. Calm is command. When she stays steady in the face of disrespect or manipulation, she signals that she cannot be shaken. Emotional discipline allows her to listen without absorbing, observe without reacting, and respond only when it serves her. Silence is one of her most effective tools. Silence forces toxic people to confront themselves. Without an emotional response to feed on, their behavior becomes more obvious. Silence interrupts manipulation because it removes the conversational rhythm toxic people use to steer outcomes. She does not rush to fill gaps or defend her character. She lets silence do the work. A high-value woman understands that not every accusation deserves a response, and not every misunderstanding needs clarification. Some people twist explanations into weapons. She avoids that trap by choosing restraint. Restraint protects her energy and preserves her authority. Self-respect is the anchor that keeps her emotionally disciplined. She knows her values, her limits, and her worth. Because of this, she is not easily pulled into defending herself against baseless criticism. She does not accept disrespect just to keep peace. She does not compromise her standards for approval. Emotional discipline also means she does not engage in emotional bargaining. She does not chase validation, reassurance, or apologies from people incapable of accountability. She recognizes that seeking emotional resolution from toxic individuals often deepens the harm. Instead, she resolves things internally by accepting reality as it is, not as she wishes it to be. When faced with gaslighting, she does not argue endlessly about what happened. She trusts her memory, her perception, and her experience. She knows that someone who denies your reality is not interested in truth. Rather than exhausting herself, she disengages and creates distance. Calm responses are intentional. She keeps her tone neutral, her words measured, and her body language relaxed. This does not mean she agrees or submits. It means she chooses clarity over chaos. Toxic people often escalate when calm responses block their influence, but she does not rise to the bait. Silence also gives her time to think. Emotional discipline is not about suppression. It is about regulation. She allows herself to feel emotions privately without acting on them impulsively. She processes before she responds. This protects her from saying things she does not mean and doing things she cannot undo. High-value women also understand that emotional discipline involves walking away mentally before walking away physically. Detachment begins when expectations drop. She stops hoping the person will change. She stops investing emotionally in unstable dynamics. This inner withdrawal weakens toxic influence long before any external boundary is enforced. Self-respect shows in what she tolerates. She does not normalize disrespect. She does not excuse repeated boundary violations. When patterns repeat, she does not argue. She adjusts. She steps back. This quiet withdrawal is powerful because it is rooted in clarity, not anger. She understands that toxic people often try to provoke guilt by labeling boundaries as coldness or arrogance. Emotional discipline allows her to hear these accusations without internalizing them. She knows that guilt is often the last tool used when control is lost. High-value women are comfortable being misunderstood. Emotional discipline frees her from the need to be liked by everyone. She knows that integrity sometimes looks like distance and that peace sometimes requires disappointing people. Calm energy shifts power dynamics. When she remains steady, the other person is forced to either self-regulate or reveal their instability. Either outcome gives her clarity. Emotional discipline turns chaos into information. She also recognizes that emotional discipline protects her long-term well-being. Chronic exposure to toxic dynamics erodes confidence and clarity. By regulating her responses, she prevents emotional burnout and preserves her sense of self. Self-respect also means she does not return to situations that repeatedly disturb her peace. Emotional discipline helps her resist nostalgia, loneliness, and guilt that tempt her to re-enter harmful dynamics. She remembers how she felt, not just what she hoped for. High-value women do not seek to dominate toxic people. They seek freedom from them. Emotional discipline makes freedom possible because it cuts emotional cords. Without emotional access, manipulation fails. Calm, silence, and self-respect are not defensive strategies. They are positions of strength. They signal independence, clarity, and emotional maturity. When toxic people realize they can no longer provoke reactions, extract energy, or create chaos, they lose influence. This is why emotional discipline is the ultimate power. It allows a high-value woman to remain grounded, unshaken, and in control of her inner world, regardless of external behavior, protecting her peace, her dignity, and her sense of self in every interaction.